Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is environmental injustices, local, national, and global, and the guest is Dr. DPadgett from Tennessee State University. Of course, Dr. Padgett, let me welcome you to the show this morning. And to tell you, Dr. Padgett, that we've had a number of excellent shows with you. As a matter of fact, I happen to recall a couple right at this very moment. That Maytown project that we did, and I think that was very, very successful because we've had a lot of responses in reference to that. And one that I think is always top, and that was the one dealing with chocolate cities. And I think that was a very, very influential and very, very important show. And today we're to deal with environmental injustices, local, national, and global. And so let's have you to start off, Dr. Padgett, by giving us some statements in reference to your background, that kind of information. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And then we'll get into global injustices and and the reasons you consider these things to be global injustices, local, national, and global.
Yes, I'm an associate professor of geography at Tennessee State University. My primary area of focus is environmental science, or has been. And so I graduated from the University of Florida and Western Kentucky University, primarily studying geography and geology. One of my areas of specialization was environmental geology. In fact, I taught environmental geology at both Austin Peay State University and at Vanderbilt University before coming to Tennessee State University. And so I became aware of the environmental justice movement when I was in graduate school. And so I'd always been politically active and socially active, and I've known I wanted to study environmental science since I was 12 years old, but I had never really put the two together until I read an article in Emerge magazine featuring a Dr. Robert Bullard, who is now at Clark Atlanta University, director of the Environmental Justice Resource Center there. And he is considered to be the father of environmental justice. And so essentially what the environmental justice movement is the coming together of the civil rights movement of the 60s and the environmental movement. Those two movements during the 60s were in parallel to one another. But when we started getting into the 1970s and especially in the 1980s, social activists and environmental activists got together recognizing that people of color in their communities were being disproportionately impacted by both human-made environmental hazards and natural environmental hazards. And so people started to see that, for instance, landfills were disproportionately sited in African American and low-income communities. All types of industrial facilities that emit waste to air, land, and water were disproportionately found in black communities. And what made it worse was that a lot of the low-income communities had no voice in those decisions. Probably the most well-known case of environmental injustice is in what's called Cancer Alley in Louisiana, which is between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, where the majority of our nation's petrochemical industry is based. And in and around those massive plants are low-income communities who have to breathe in the fumes and toxins from those refineries and such, and yet aren't employed by the refineries, get no economic advantage from the refineries, but take all of the waste and negative impacts from them.
They just happen to be there, and these refineries emit that whatever, even as you indicated, they're not no benefits at all for the community. Is that what you're saying?
Not at all. And in fact, in many cases, people will say, well, why don't they just move? Why don't they move away? Well, these are low-income communities. And in other cases, due to past vestiges of housing discrimination, sometimes that's the only place African Americans could live was in these undesirable parcels of land. And so the whole notion that African Americans and or low-income people moved in the face or in the way of these toxic sites is just not valid. And some people will try to argue that.
In other words, these sites were probably sited there primarily because it was easier to site such a corporation or such refinery there than anywhere else. Is that any other part of the city?
Yeah, they just follow the path of least resistance. Those who are least able to afford a legal defense or least able to afford to move, then they were just subjected to whatever toxins were literally blew their way. In many cases, they did not know what was blowing in their direction.
Very good. And of course, let's take this first commercial break. Dr. Padgett, we'll be back to continue our discussion. We'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.